All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Samantha Mirabom with Melco's application team, and we're doing our DesignShop Talk today. Back at it for another few weeks. So, to answer whatever questions you might have, whether it be about DesignShop or pretty much whatever you want to talk about, I'm usually game for. So, excuse me. If you have any questions during the live, type them in on the comments. We're live on both YouTube and Facebook. So, and if you see me looking off to the left, that's where I've got the feeds up so I can see whatever questions you guys type in, and I'll try to get them answered real time for you. In the meantime, we had some questions that were typed in on the, what were they? On the questions I posted on Facebook, polling for things to talk about, and we'll start with those. All right, so first ones were, is there a way to do tiny lettering smaller than the 0.17? So small lettering is always an interesting challenge. I know where this question was asked, I posted a link to a bunch of video or to a Q&A section. We'll try to get the small video link posted on these comments as well so you have them. But it kind of boils down to a few things. One is going to be your needle size. So going down in needle size and down in thread size. So, traditionally when we're embroidering, we use a 40 weight thread. When you go into the smaller you want to go, the more delicate the stitches have to be, right? The smaller the thread has to be. I always like to think about it as, drawing with a permanent marker versus a sharpened pencil. So if you think of the 40 weight thread as being your permanent marker, if you're trying to draw something really tiny with it, it's not going to work out so well for you. Whereas if you go to a 60 weight thread or even a 75 weight thread, it's smaller, so you can get better detail and more crisp the smaller you go. So we did get the link posted for you on the small lettering so that you can go watch that. Scott did a video, it's about 45 minutes long, that talks about small lettering. I was going to go ahead and pull up just one example just to have something to look at, to talk to. But, one is going to, like I said, is always going to be making sure you're using a small needle, small thread, and that you consider using a topper. When you're doing tiny things, it tends to sink in. So putting a topper on top helps keep the stitches on top of the fabric rather than lowering down into it. Here, this one is just a quote from Wizard of Oz. But if you look at it, it's actually the industry script font. So if I go into the properties here, so you can see them, the code sheet, if you look at industry script, says it should be no smaller. The suggested minimum height is 0.5, but this sews out beautifully. So you can go lower than the recommendations. It's just a matter of thinking about the properties and what would work for you. So what properties are relative here, right? So it's going to be on your underlay. So making sure you've got a center walk underlay and your stitch length is smaller. If you've got really long stitches, it's not going to give you that foundation of thread underneath it to help hold it on top of your fabric. So making sure you have a nice center walk underneath there. You don't need anything more than that. The stitches are so small that it's, you try to put a zigzag under there, it's going to look like a center walk anyway. So all you really need is your center walk. The other thing is to look at your pull compensation. You'll notice when you see it on the screen here, it almost looks too bold. But remember, things shrink when we embroider, right? So it's going to narrow up. That's your pull effect. So as it narrows, you're going to see those openings open back up, particularly if you're using a smaller thread. All right, so making sure you have some offset on there to make them just a little bit bolder so that when it sews, you'll get a nice clean letter. Okay, so you want to make sure you have that. And then, of course, it's going to be your tie-in and tie-outs. You're dealing with small things, so having really big knots, like tie-outs, tie-ins, or tie-offs, is going to leave it where those stitches hang outside your letters, which isn't it's not a cute look. So making sure you've got appropriate small, see that? Small knots, and making sure your auto trims are set so that it trims between your letters or your words if you want that. Okay, so you can pretty much adjust it to what you want. Just remember, the smaller you go, the more likely you're going to have to switch to tinier threads and tinier needles in order for it to look clean. Oh, good morning, Lorena. Yeah, I'm sorry I missed last week. Had a family engagement. All right. Oops. Cancel. What am I doing? All right. So that is small lettering. And check out Scott's video. He did a really nice job of kind of explaining the details on there on how to do tiny letter. And if this doesn't help, let me know and we'll get more details for you. So back to my questions. Where are they? There they are. Can you explain or link how to do gradients again? There was a video done in a DesignShop Talk. Nate did it last year on blending. I posted a link to that where this question was asked, so I checked that one out. And there's a few other DS Talks where we've covered it. But blending, there's also a really good article on Melco's blog that Nate did, which talks about the saturation and other things. So it's just a good read. So I would check that out as well. And I apologize to whoever's supporting me having to look up these links that I'm just throwing out. Sorry. Let's see. I have this guy. All right. So when it comes to blending, there's a few things you've got. One is color selection, right? Making sure that it's appropriate. But to get these blends, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. This is just one technique. I'm going to open up the first set of colors. Okay, you notice these aren't the exact rainbow colors. They're those kind of the different shades that are going to help give you that really nice blend, right? So if you do those, notice the fill areas are kind of butt up and they're just straight fills. There's, you know, a little bit lighter on their densities because you're going to go back over them. So it's got a density of 5 because you are going to sew back over them with your actual blends to kind of make these intersections go away, and that's what's going to give you that really nice color blend to it. So if I take that and now I look at the actual blends, so see this, not that one, there we go. All right, so there are those. You notice how it's dense, the density here is denser where it intersects the two colors butting up to one another. Okay, so how do you do those? If you go into the properties, under here you've got effects. Actually, it helps if I actually select a blend to show you. Sorry. So let's look at this guy right here. Okay. So if I go into the effects, notice you can turn on custom density. And if you just do custom density, it leaves it as a single color. Okay. So that's what you have right here is a single color. And all it's doing is it's kind of feathering that out. So from the high density up 20 down to through the middle, it's 5 and back out to 20. Okay, so that is going to be how you can set that up, and then you really just adjust it till it looks good to you, right? I know Nate and I have different opinions on how to do this. When I'm doing blends, personally, I always turn on auto density or auto apply so that as I adjust these real time and move things around, play with it, I can see what's happening and adjust accordingly. So I can play with all these points, add additional points, you know, whatever I need to do to get that to look how I want. Now I know Nate doesn't like auto apply. So it's a personal preference. You'll find all digitizers, you know, find what they like to do. So that will get you that blend. Now there is of course other ways you can do them. So here's another example for you. Okay, so this is 3 different blends all done in 3 different ways, to give you 3 different looks. So let's look at them. All right, so this first one, we sew a solid fill, and after that, it's duplicated, so it's the same shape with a custom density. So if I come into this one, you can see it's got the effects of custom density applied, and it gives you kind of that blend where it's lighter here, so you get those stitches kind of blending in with the darker ones so that it kind of fades over into this brighter color. Okay, so that's one way. Here would be another, is similar to that other one I just did, where you split it in half, give it 2 colors, and then you take your third color and blend across the middle. Okay, so that is again another way to do it, and that uses the same custom density. And yet another way you could do it was, again, split it, and notice my stitch direction running one way. You can then apply basically create, random shapes through there and apply a random edge to it. So if I go into the effects, I can enable the random edge, and that'll kind of add that jagged look to it. So you can do the same thing and get 3 different looks with the blends. Now, in those videos that we talked about before on your blending, it does go into details on how to pay attention to your stitch length and things like that. So where that becomes important is getting the stitches to kind of sink into it. So as you're going up in layers, so for instance, this pansy here, if I look at this first color, right, it's got a stitch length of 40. So, a relatively long stitch going from needle penetration to needle penetration. Well, the blend layer that sits on top of it right here is, again, just a complex fill with a wider density, but it also has the random edge to give them, because we wanted kind of not a uniform look. But here's the fun part right here. The stitch length is smaller than 40. It's 30 now. And what that's going to do, it's going to sink those stitches down into the layer beneath it so that it's not just sitting on top of the threads. Okay, so by doing that, it can kind of help it look more like a blend and less like 2 threads sitting on top of each other. Okay, so those are some of the different techniques you can use to kind of create different blends. They're a lot of fun, and like I said, how I've always done it is I play with them. Now, there's one other way you can do blends that I did not show here. So if I take a fill, and let's make it purple. All right, so if I take that and I go into the properties, I come over to effects, say custom density, and I say blend, hit apply, and then I'm going to come over here and give it another color. Notice now I have a 2-color blend. And again, like I said, I like this auto density because I can play with these settings and, just play with it until I get the look that I want for this particular application. Okay, whether it's convex, concave, whatever. If the density is too open, I would lower this. And literally, this is how I do it. I just sit here and play with them until I like the look. Okay, and add points and move it around. I will say it's often easier, rather than playing with the blend this way, to do it how I showed in these other examples of where you have each color independent. That's usually easier for me than playing with this, but either way, you get the job done, right? Okay, so let's see. Something was typed in. Let me quick scan the comments since I ran my mouth a lot. Let's see. When I load a design to embroider the color changes, to pick the colors to pick, how do I keep colors from not changing? Okay, so that's an OS type question. So I actually logged into one of my machines so I could show you OS type stuff today. So if you go into Tools, Settings, over here you have Use Colors from Design or Not. All right, so if it's set to Use Colors from Design, notice whether I have this colored that way or not, that's how it's going to show up. Now, if I want to see how it's actually going to sew with the colors I selected, which is if I uncheck this, notice it's different colors. How that works is you've got to make sure this guy, your color sequence, your color tree is filled in. So you've got to color that with the threads that are on your machine. Okay, so for instance, if well, these are the actual colors on my machine, but to set them, you right click on one of those bubbles, choose the thread. So in this case, it's 1645, you hit apply, okay, and now that bubble is colored in. All right, that way, once you assign each of these colors to a specific needle over here on the machine, it'll show up with how you actually colored it. I like that as a double check to make sure I colored it right and I didn't mess something up. I find when I do, if I leave Use Colors from Design, unless I'm certain I picked the right colors, it's aggravating to me because I'll end up sewing it and having not paid attention, selecting a color change or something, it'll end up sewing wrong. So I like using, turning that use colors from design off and making sure my color tree is colored in. That way I have a double check. Excuse me. I have a double check on the screen that it's going to sew out how I want. All right, let's see. What else do we have? Ooh, it's Christina in Italy. Awesome. I'm so glad you like the videos. Let us know what questions or any topics you want to have covered. I don't speak Italian. I'm sorry. Okay, so let's see. We did gradients. Adjusting the length of trims. All right, so okay. So there's a few questions I have kind of following up on this one. So in general, it says, I get this and I don't like it. I want all these. I'm assuming what you really want is all these dotted lines to go away. So there's a few things going on here. One, are those dotted lines sewing? In most cases, they're not. Okay. So if I go open up, let's open up this guy. Okay. So you see all these dotted lines? When I go to sew, they're not going to be there. Okay. So, but you notice there are jump stitches on here that I don't, these connector stitches here that I may or may not want. All right. So one way you have to deal with those is it's not actually a trim setting. It's under your options. So if you go tools, options, down here, jump stitches for trim. So if I lower that number and then save the file, close it and reopen it, file, open. Now notice all those connector stitches that were there are now gone. All right, so just by doing that, you get rid of them so they won't sew. So if you're looking to get rid of those jump stitches, that's how you would do it. So tools, options, lower this number, close the file, reopen it, and it will recalculate and get rid of those jump stitches so that they don't actually drag across your work when it's sewing. Now, if what you're really wanting is you don't like these dotted lines, well, those dotted lines are an artifact of different equipment, right? So different equipment can only move a certain amount, so you have to program in these kind of artificial jumps so that it can get to the next point. So if you want to modify those, you would have to, so let's see if I can find one. There. All right, so there's one that has it. So I can go find the stitches and delete them, or what I find easier is once you have it selected, come over to the Stitches tab, and if I scroll down, see these things that have jump next to them? Those are the jump stitches. Those are the ones that you want to delete. So if I select and then I hold the Shift key and click on the bottom one, so now all three of those are selected, and I hit delete, now that dotted line goes away. Okay, so I can, now this isn't necessary because none of those are going to sew anyway, but if for whatever reason you want them gone, and I will say I spend a silly amount of time making them go away, or mainly because when I select something, I want to select it and not have to go, oh wait, there's this weird jump stitch all the way out to the end of time that I didn't draw a box around, so now it didn't select everything I want. So it, that's all you would do. You would select your element, come over here, select the first one, hold your Shift key down, select the last one. On this jump command, hit delete. When you're done with it, there, those dotted lines are gone. So depending on what it is you're trying to do, it's either going to be your tools, options, and this, reopen the file, and that should fix it. Or you can delete them manually by deleting these jump stitches right here. Okay, hopefully that helps. Let's see. What else do we have? All right, no others typed in yet, so back to my things. So this one says, I've been having a lot of bird nesting lately. So bird nesting, let's talk about that specifically. Bird nesting, I find, is typically something with the upper thread path. Now, is it always? No, but typically when I see it, it's something with the upper thread path. So the things that you would want to look at is the rollers, making sure the thread is under the rollers and it didn't slip out from under it, that the rollers are well lubricated and clean. So if you pop them off, you might need to clean them, re-grease them, and put them back on. That's in the maintenance steps under thread feed rollers maintenance, I think. So that's where you'd find the steps for that, but you'd want to clean them and re-grease them. So like I said, typically it's going to be something with your upper thread path, your active feed being too high, your thread coming out from under the roller. Maybe the black cover is not quite there, so it's intermittent on how it's feeding the thread. So look at your upper thread path for the bird nesting. Shreds, breaks, and slingshots. Start with the basic. Make sure your presser foot's good, your active feed settings are appropriate for what you're sewing on. Your needles are all the way up. I know this is rather embarrassing, but I was I was fighting with one needle on one of my machines, just aggravated because I was having all kinds of issues. And come to find out, the needle wasn't pushed all the way up. So yeah, it wasn't sewing quite well, giving me all kinds of problems. I pushed the needle up and wow, it sews right now. Anyway, that was my slap myself on the head moment of this week. You have a Bravo, I believe you said, C package. Depends on the trimmer. If you've got an S95 hook, maybe inspect the black plastic on the gib. That's called the gib. See if there's any burrs on it. So that could cause shredding. So that's kind of where I would start, is settings, and then inspect your hook well and see if there's any rough spots, particularly if you've had needle breaks. Maybe a piece of the needle got in and scratched up or dinged that the black plastic on the hook. So you might need to either replace the gib or, get it clean, smooth out the burrs. Okay. What else? Should active feed and minimum preset match when adjusting tension? Not quite sure I follow that question. Your minimum preset is how tight you're allowing the thread to get. Okay, so by making sure, oh, that's a fun question. Sorry. Okay, so your minimum preset is basically how tight your thread can get, all right, to avoid snapping. Okay, whereas your active feed, as it's sewing, is going to be variable. That's being driven by the sensor on your machine. So should your minimum and what it's actually sewing at match all the time? Most cases, no, because it's depending on the size of the stitch, how fast you're sewing, all kinds of variables, how thick your material is, all of that. As it's sewing, it's going to be deciding, hey, I need more thread, I need less thread, so let me make it tighter, no, let me loosen it up some. So it'll be feeding more or less depending on the sewing conditions of what you're working on. So should it match? No. But your minimum preset is just kind of that floor of how tight, you don't want it going any tighter than this, because if it drops any lower, I'm now going to be struggling with either it pulling so tight that the stitches are pulling into my fabric too much, or it's snapping the thread, things like that. So, no. Should they match? In general, no. Let's see. Does DesignShop have the ability for digitizing sequins? Yes, it does. So, sequins. Walk. Sequin. Digitize. Draw a shape, it puts the sequins in, and then you can choose the different types of sequins. You can do the pattern that it's going to sew over it and play with the settings to get the sequins placed how you want. And this question, when I show this, often comes up with, ooh, where can I get a sequin attachment? It's been discontinued for our equipment. So yes, you can digitize for it, but unless you have old equipment, either an XT or an XTS, and the discontinued attachment, then we're not able to sew it on our machines. Okay, so let's see what else. Have you ever done a design on high top leather tennis shoes, needle size, any other settings to be used? Have I personally done them? No, I haven't personally done it. I have a friend who's done quite a few of them. I've seen customers do them. Basically, when working with those, it's going to boil down to you're sewing on a thicker material, Okay, so making sure it's hooped, that you have an appropriate hoop to be able to hoop it. You can use the fast clamps would be great, especially if you're sewing on the tongue. I know they do make special hoops that can go on like the side of a shoe. So there's different shapes that kind of slide in and help clamp it down so you can get as close to the edge as you can reasonably. But when you're sewing on those leathers, you're going to up your active feed. You're going to, let's see, up your active feed, make sure that your designs aren't super dense, because particularly if there's no, I guess it depends on the shoe construction. Sorry, I'm rambling. But if it's straight leather, if you go and there's no other backings or anything in there, and you do it super dense, you run the risk of, creating a pop-out patch. That would be obnoxious, particularly if it's a high-end shoe. So you can get leather to test on, and tandy leather, their vegetable hide, those sorts of things. You can practice out, test your design out ahead of time before you go to the expensive gear. That's what I would suggest doing. When I do big bags, tends to be how I work on them, like expensive bags. I'll get a similar material, sew it out, and then call it good once I'm happy with it. As far as needle size, when you're doing on leather, you're going to want to use typically something larger, so an 80 or 90. I will say I am pretty ridiculous. I tend to stay with the 75/11 unless I have issues. But the better way to go is to use the right needles for the job. So it'd be better to go up to an 80. All right, let's see. What else do we have? A link. So for the question on bird's nest, we do have a link in the comments for you. Oh, yeah, Jenny, I did get that question, and I think there it is. Okay, so we're getting there anyway. Should activate. All right, we talked about that one here. So this one you also asked, how do you have different thread colors with different active feed settings? Okay, so I actually did, that's why I have my machines up today, to show you this. So that's going to be a settings by color. So how you would do that, so let me back up. What the question's actually asking is, what happens when you want color 1 to sew at a minimum preset of one number, and let's say you want it to sew at 1200, but then when you get to color 3, you're sewing with metallic, you need to increase your active feed a little bit, you need to slow the machine down. How do you do that automatically without having to go over to the machine and go, oh wait, slow down, or oh, I need to up my active feed now? All right, so you can do that automatically using settings by color, which is right here. So this is where you'd normally set your colors. All right, so that's the color sequence. But over here, settings by color, if I enable that, now for each thread color, I can set different speeds. So let's say I want that one to sew ridiculously fast. And maybe I want the minimum limit to be something higher. So I can do that. Or maybe I want to change it to standard, or, whatever it is, you can set your settings specific to color 3. And then when it goes back to color 4, it goes back to whatever you have set for color 4. So when you use that, it'll automatically, once it gets to the color, so in this case, it'll be sewing at 950 for color 2, it'll get to color 3, it'll sew silly fast, and then it will slow back down. So that's settings by color, and you set that up straight as you're setting up your color sequence. Okay, another question was typed in on Facebook. Let's see. Is there a way to move the design from the computer screen in advanced mode? Wait, in advanced mode? I know there is a Melco interface. It's nice not to have to go back and forth between machine and computer. Are you talking about moving this design around? I'm not quite sure I 100% understand the question. I apologize. So, correct me if I'm wrong. Let me scroll down and see if you typed in. You didn't yet. Okay. So, are you asking how do I get this over here? Like move it around? That's done on the keypad. So, where's my keypad? There it is. So on the keypad, you would hit hoop and arrows and just watch the screen. If you have multiple machines and the computer or the machine that you want is not on the screen, then what you would do is hit this bullseye button, hold it down for, depends on what version of software you're running. Sometimes you have to hold it down for a second or so. But if you hold that down, that will focus the software on the machine that you're messing with. Okay, so if you hold that down, that now will be on your computer screen, so then you can hoop and arrows and move your design around so it fits wherever you want in the hoop. Okay, so you don't have to run to the computer. You literally just hoop and move the arrows around, and this will, you know, drive over there, drive over here, wherever you drive it to. Okay, let's see. What other questions do we have? Tim, if that's not, doesn't answer it, let me know. Might have misunderstood what you're asking. You bought some practice shoes? That's awesome. You know, honestly, the best way whenever you're doing test sew outs and finalizing settings and whatnot, it's always a good idea to sew out on a similar material garment of any kind, so that you know what stabilizers, what settings worked or didn't work. You know, that's all good info for you. All right, let's see, what else do we have? Back to this stuff. We talked about that. Oh, that was all the questions I had. I don't see any on YouTube. Let me check Facebook. I don't think I missed any here. So, any other questions you guys have before I call it a day? And next week I'll be back. I got to talk to the guys and see what they're going to do. I've got a vacation upcoming in July, but that's not yet, so don't worry. But okay, awesome, Tim. So be sure to send in your questions. Ask them live on this. We do these typically weekly. It is summer, so I've got a few brief vacations coming up that I'm doing with my family, so I'm not going to be doing a live on the road. But hopefully the guys will do it. Yay. I hope you find these helpful. I'll be back next Thursday. Yes, next Thursday instead of Friday. And we'll see what questions you have for next week. Okay, everyone? Well, I will talk to you then. Happy weekend, and you guys enjoy sewing. Make something cool. All right. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.